The dirigible Meridian had been climbing for 3 days when Captain Yara Solis first noticed the birds. They shouldn't have existed at this altitude, 40,000 feet above the churning Atlantic, where the air was thin enough to make even her augmented lungs labor. Yet there they were, small things with iridescent feathers that caught the morning light like oil on water, wheeling and diving through clouds that had no business being so thick, so alive. "Ma'am," her navigator, Chen, called from the bridge. His voice carried that particular tension that came from seeing impossible things. "The barometer's gone mad." Yara crossed to the instrument panel, her boots magnetic against the deck as the ship pitched through turbulence. The brass needle swung wildly, clicking against its stops. Altitude 40,000 feet. Then 25,000. Then 60,000. All within seconds, though the ship's gyroscope insisted they held steady course. "It's not the instruments," she said quietly. "It's where we are." She'd heard the stories, of course. Every sky sailor had. Whispers in port taverns about the veiled reaches, the places between altitudes where the normal rules slipped like poorly tied knots. Her grandmother had claimed to have seen them once, decades ago, before the empire's expansion had mapped every current and catalogued every cloud formation from Cape Horn to the Bering Strait. "There are places," her grandmother had said, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, "where the sky keeps secrets." The clouds ahead began to glow. Not with sunlight. The sun was still below the horizon, painting the lower atmosphere in shades of amber and rose. This was different. A luminescence that seemed to come from within the clouds themselves, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "Should I adjust course?" Chen's hand hovered over the altitude controls. Yara thought of the cargo hold below, packed with medical supplies for the colony at Reykjavik. Thought of the company's schedule, the fuel calculations, the weather windows that closed like doors in a burning house. Thought of her career, built on reliability and punctuality over 15 years of service. Then she thought of her grandmother's eyes, bright with memory and regret. "I should have gone deeper," the old woman had said. "I should have seen what was there." "Hold course," Yara said. "Ahead slow." The Meridian nosed into the glowing clouds like a whale breaching from dark water into light. The world changed. It wasn't dramatic. No thunderclap, no sensation of passage. One moment they were in normal cloud cover, visibility near zero. The next, the ship emerged into a vast cavern of open air, ringed entirely by walls of cloud that rose and curved overhead like the interior of a cathedral built for gods. And floating there, suspended in the impossible space, was a city. It hung in defiance of every law Yara had studied at the Naval Academy. Spires of crystal and stone reaching upward and downward simultaneously, connected by bridges of braided mist that held solid under the weight of people. Figures moved across those bridges, too distant to make out clearly, but undeniably alive, going about their business as if cities in the sky were the most natural thing in the world. "Dear God," Chin whispered. Gardens spiraled around the spires, greenery so vibrant it hurt to look at, fed by waterfalls that flowed up as often as down. The iridescent birds, thousands of them now, wove between the structures in murmuring flocks, and there were other things flying too, creatures with gossamer wings, ships like the Meridian but built of materials that seemed to shift between solid and vapor, and shapes she had no names for. "Ma'am, I'm reading breathable air outside," the engineer called up from below deck. "Better than breathable. Oxygen content is high, temperature is comfortable. This shouldn't be possible." But there it was. A small vessel approached, something like a gondola carved from a single piece of amber-colored wood, propelled by no visible means. A figure stood at its prow, tall, humanoid, wearing robes that moved as if underwater. When it drew close enough, Yara could see that its skin held the same iridescence as the birds, and its eyes were the deep black of high altitude. It raised one long-fingered hand in greeting. Yara found herself at the Meridian's railing, her crew gathered behind her in silent wonder. She raised her hand in return. The figure smiled, and that simple expression of warmth bridged whatever gulf of strangeness lay between them. It gestured toward the city, an invitation clear in the motion. "Captain?" Chen asked. "What do we do?" "What?" Yara looked at her ship, solid and reliable. Looked at the chronometer on the wall, ticking away the minutes of their delay. Looked at the maps in the navigation room with their carefully drawn borders and confidently labeled territories, maps that had no room for cities in the sky. Then she looked at the floating metropolis, at the gardens hanging in defiance of gravity, at the people moving through their impossible lives. She thought of all the journeys she'd made following other people's charts, and felt something in her chest unfold like a sail catching wind. "We moor the ship," she said, "and we see what's behind the clouds." The crew moved with the efficiency of long practice, but there was something different in their movements now, a lightness and eagerness. Even old Ramirez, the engineer who complained about everything, was grinning like a child. As the Meridian secured itself to a crystal mooring spire that appeared at the amber vessel's summoning, Yara realized this was why she'd become a sky sailor in the first place. Not for the schedules or the shipping routes, but for this, the moment when the map ran out and the real journey began. The iridescent figure helped them from the ship onto a platform of braided mist that held firm beneath their boots. Up close, Yara could see that the city was even more complex than it had appeared, layers upon layers of architecture from 1,000 different traditions, all woven together in harmony. The air smelled of flowers she'd never encountered and something else, something that made her think of the moment just before dawn. The figure spoke, and though the words were like nothing Yara had ever heard, their meaning settled in her mind as clearly as if they'd been spoken in her native tongue. "Welcome," it said, "to Ethermore. We've been waiting for someone to find us again. It's been so long since the sky roads were traveled." "Again?" Yara asked. "People have been here before?" The figure's smile deepened. "How do you think the old stories began? Every culture that has looked up has dreamed of cities in the clouds, not because they imagined them, but because they remembered them." It gestured to the expanse of the floating city. "We exist in the places between, where the air is thick enough to hold dreams but thin enough that most travelers pass right through without seeing. You had to want to find us. Had to be willing to look." Chen was already wandering toward a nearby garden, where plants grew in spirals that traced mathematical equations in their leaves. Ramirez was in conversation with a figure whose skin sparkled like starlight, gesturing animatedly about something technical. "How long can we stay?" Yara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "As long as you choose," the figure said. "Time moves differently here. Hours, days, years, these are choices, not certainties. When you return to your world, you'll find that no more than a heartbeat has passed, or you can linger until seasons change and return to find decades gone. The sky keeps its own counsel about such things. Yara thought of the schedule, the cargo, the career. Then she thought of her grandmother, who had turned away at this threshold and spent the rest of her life wondering what she'd missed. "Show me everything," Yara said. And the figure led her deeper into Ethermore, into streets that curved through 4 dimensions, into libraries where books wrote themselves based on the questions you asked, into amphitheaters where music was made from condensed starlight and bottled thunder. She learned that the city wasn't just one place but a nexus, a meeting point for all the peoples who had learned to navigate the hidden currents of the upper atmosphere. She met traders from floating kingdoms near Venus, where storms the size of planets provided endless energy. She shared tea with scholars who studied the migration patterns of cloud whales, creatures so vast that whole ecosystems lived in the barnacles on their backs. She watched children, some human, some decidedly not, playing a game that involved sculpting air into temporary birds that lived just long enough to sing a single note. Days passed, or perhaps hours, or perhaps years. Yara stopped counting. And when she finally returned to the Meridian, her crew trailing behind her with faces full of wonder and notebooks full of discoveries, she found that the ship was exactly as they'd left it, but they were not. Something fundamental had shifted in them, some understanding that the world was larger and stranger and more full of grace than any map could contain. "Captain," Shin asked as they prepared to cast off, "do we tell them? The company, the empire, the cartographers." Yara looked back at Ethermore, at the city that would vanish into the clouds the moment they departed, hiding again until someone else had the courage to look. "We tell them we delivered the cargo on schedule," she said. "And then we file a report about unusual atmospheric conditions. Wind shear, temperature inversions, all technically true. And for ourselves?" Yara smiled and set their course for Reykjavik, but she noted the exact coordinates, the altitude, the specific quality of light and air. "For ourselves," she said, "we remember the way back. And we make sure that when the time is right, others can find it too." The Meridian slipped out of the cavern of clouds, and behind them, Ethermore faded into mist and light, invisible once more to the ordinary traffic of the sky. But Yara could still feel it there. A presence on the edge of perception, a promise that the world held more wonders than cynicism allowed. On her desk, she kept her grandmother's compass, the one the old woman had given her before she died, with a whispered confession, "I marked it. The way back. I was just never brave enough to return." Yara opened the compass now and saw what she'd never noticed before. A tiny scratch on the brass casing, pointing to a heading that corresponded to nothing on any official chart. Pointing to possibility. Pointing to what lived behind the clouds. And she understood that her grandmother had returned after all, by giving the map to someone who would use it. Some journeys, Yara realized, took more than one generation to complete. Below them, the Atlantic stretched away in endless blue. Above, the clouds piled up in mountains and valleys of white and gold. And somewhere between, invisible to ordinary sight, Ethermore waited for the next traveler brave enough to look. The Meridian sailed on through the sky, carrying its crew and its cargo and its secrets, while behind them the clouds kept their eternal watch over wonders that the world had forgotten but never truly lost. In the end, Yara thought that was the greatest wonder of all. That magic didn't disappear from the world. It just learned to hide from those who stopped believing, and reveal itself to those who still did.